Hello, everybody. Hello, and thank you for joining us today. Because there's just a few of you here on the Zoom, and we also have some people in the classroom. It would be great if you're able to turn on your cameras, just so it can be maybe more of a dialogue and discussion. Kyle, hello. It's good to see you. If you're able to, we'd love to see your faces. So just a very quick housekeeping thing before I introduce the man who does not need an introduction, I think, for most of you, but just a quick housekeeping thing. You all know, I think, well familiar with this. At the very bottom, there's the raise hand function, and of course, you can write questions in the chat. Again, we want this to be as much of a discussion, really, as possible. But for those of you here, I think you are in for a treat, getting, of course, to have a conversation directly with our former and founding dean, Ambassador Lee Feinstein, who is currently the president of McLarty Associates. And it would take a very long time to go over his entire career, which is, hopefully what will give him space to talk on himself. But over the past 20 years, Ambassador Feinstein has held multiple senior positions at the Department of State and Defense on presidential campaigns of Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, and including most recently serving as the U.S. ambassador to Poland. He served as principal deputy director of the policy planning staff. He has worked as a policy scholar at the nation's leading think tanks, including as deputy director of studies and senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. On top of that, holds multiple presidential appointments. But I think above all of these things, and I think I've said this every time I've ever had the honor of introducing you, Ambassador Feinstein is genuinely just one of the nicest human beings. And we're so grateful that you're taking the time today to talk to us. So please join me in welcoming Ambassador Feinstein for this second session of our Global Careers series.
Thanks so much, Isak. What a nice introduction. Nice to see some familiar faces. Kyle, I'm hoping that the atom behind you isn't like the atomic clock on the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists and an indication of imminent nuclear war.
Yes, especially coming from him. Well, so I'm going to ask a few questions just to get us started. And then you guys, I mean, this is a time for you to talk, but just to get the juices flowing, Ambassador Feinstein, I think it would be really helpful because we hear the mountaintop report, right? And we see the end result. But I think that for a lot of us, how the sausage gets made is a little opaque, perhaps. And so maybe could you start by maybe demystifying your career? What motivations, what people, what decisions got you to where you are?
Well, Isak, thanks so much. And Isak, you're an inspiration to everyone, and we really appreciate your organizing this and the great role you're playing at the school, both substantively and establishing our cybersecurity and global policy program, and also helping to bring the amazing group of people on this call to HLS. And it's nice to see some familiar faces. I also see some, I would say, fellow Poles on the call, and that's also very exciting. So let me just say that, just in terms of career paths, everybody's got their own career path. The most important thing that I think we share is that we're all people who are attending liberal arts institutions and getting a liberal arts education, and that I think is the most important ingredient of your success. Where I was an undergraduate, we used to say everything correlates, and it really does. And as you move up kind of the career ladder, as you all will, you're going to find that you're going to be called upon to tap into your analytical capabilities and your broad, knowledge and appreciation for different fields, different ways of evaluating and understanding circumstances, your different personal interests and experiences. So that's the first and most important career step you can take. When people ask me in these settings, what was your most important course you took as an undergraduate? I would always say, freshman English, because a good writer always moves to the head of the class. And that's one of the great things about HLS, which is you're in a small school environment in a Big Ten setting. And so you kind of get the best of both worlds. I guess I wasn't sure what my career path would be, but I always knew it would be sort of somewhere between journalism and kind of policy scholarship. I didn't know what I knew, understand what journalism was. I didn't understand what, the policy world was, but I knew I kind of wanted to be in it somehow. My kind of educational path was I studied Russian language and studied in Russia as an undergraduate, which had a big impact on my future career trajectory. Actually, en route to Moscow, we took a train from the group, met in Vienna, and took a train, was at the time a famous train that went from Vienna to what was in the Soviet Union. It was that long ago. And stopped in Poland for several days. And that was my first visit as a young man in Warsaw. And that had a big impact on my career because I served, among other things, as U.S. ambassador to Poland, as Isak said. So I guess my career trajectory was as follows. When I got out of college, I had not a clear career path. I was living in New York City, and I tried, I guess, basically to buy time and to do work that I thought was important and good. I taught English to Russian refugees in Brooklyn. I took the subway, and they tended to be adults. Their English was extremely poor. It was a good opportunity for me to get my Russian, to keep my Russian going. I don't know whether I benefited more in terms of my Russian language skills, or they benefited more in terms of their English language skills. And then I decided I would try journalism, and I worked for a local but very well-regarded newspaper, which was called The Record, which was it was where All the President's Men, the film about Woodward and Bernstein, was filmed, because they had this very technologically advanced newsroom. It was in the New York City suburbs, and that their claim to fame was that they were a color newspaper. And so they had this really awful saying, which was bright, that meant it was color. And they switched the newspaper from an afternoon to a morning release. So their motto was bright and early. But it was a feeder newspaper to for a lot of people who were pursuing journalistic careers. A funny thing that happened there was that my big story was to uncover remnants of the Manhattan Project. Kyle, this is for your benefit, where some radioactive thorium was found in a residential neighborhood outside New York City metropolitan area. I remember being very excited. I went to this very grizzled editor at the Ring in the newspaper, and I said, I came back from this big discovery, and he said to me, "Kid, when you find a town in New Jersey that doesn't have a toxic waste dump, then you'll have broken a story." So, but it's a funny career story also, because I ended up entering the field, as Kyle knows, as someone who pursued arms control and nonproliferation.
Right.
And so after graduate school, I worked as a research analyst at a place called the Center for Defense Information, which was a Pentagon watchdog group, but worked very intensively on issues related to what was then the kind of the tail end of the Cold War and the sort of flurry of arms control agreements most of which have since been dismantled since that time. But it was a very important organization, which actually was between on the margins of journalism and policy advocacy, because it was working with primary sources to develop what was previously inaccessible information to the public about defense budgets, military spending, U.S. military presence overseas, and arms control developments. And then I more or less pursued that track. I then became the assistant director of the Arms Control Association, which is a group that is still thriving and doing extremely well and has a magazine called Arms Control Today. And then I was hanging out at DuPont Circle in Washington, D.C. at the Fountain. I bumped into a person named Michelle Flournoy, who had worked with me at the Arms Control Association. And she said, "Hey, do you want to work at the Pentagon?" And this was in the early years of the Clinton administration. And I said, "No, I really have no interest in doing that. I've been outside the government and I've been kind of a government watchdog, and why would I do that?" And she took me in to meet her boss and to walk around the Pentagon. And the person who ran one of the offices was a guy named Morton Halperin, who was one of the authors of the Pentagon Papers, and somebody I had admired and followed my whole career. So I said, okay, if Mort Halperin can do this, I can do this. And plus it would have been a great honor to work for him. So I ended up having a political appointment in the Pentagon in what was then called the Office of Peacekeeping and Peace Enforcement Policy, which tells you a little bit about how the Pentagon thought about these issues. And then I was kind of the pen, just sort of to pick up the theme. I was sort of the pen for that office, in that I was the person who helped to write the policy, helped to write congressional testimony. I myself would often appear in testifying before the staff of the committee. And I was involved in something called PDD 25, which was a policy which is still kind of governs the use of force in peacekeeping operations. It was on factors for consideration in making, for the U.S. government to make decisions on participation in UN led in UN-led peacekeeping operations, blue helmeted operations. And actually that's had a big, that work was the kind of work that led to a lot of other decisions about when to get involved, and if so, how, in a range of issues where I would say top tier security interests are not necessarily touched, but there's nonetheless an important humanitarian or other requirement for international action. And that's been a recurring theme of my career as well. So I went from there to the State Department, and I went to the policy planning staff, which is the Secretary of State's in-house think tank. And I served first as a member of the policy planning staff, dealing with what were described as political military issues, which incorporated arms control, but also some of the issues we were talking about. But it was also a very global perspective. And I stayed there for much of both terms of the Clinton presidency. I left as the principal deputy of that office, which is sort of the equivalent of a principal deputy assistant secretary of state. And I was fortunate enough to travel with the Secretary of State at the time, who was Madeleine Albright. And I kind of was the sort of a person who did, helped prepare her in advance of whatever international meetings she had at that time, and make sure that the memos and preparatory materials she had were what they should have been. And that took me through the end of the Clinton administration, and then I was a political appointee, so it was my time to move on to other things. And so I moved to the think tank world, and I spent most of my time in those years at the Council on Foreign Relations, where I was a senior fellow for foreign policy and international law. got a law degree after college at Georgetown, and I was able to do a lot of international law work while there. And I also ran something called their task force program, which was, is this too much talking, Isak?
No, please. This is and also I was just thinking about how beneficial this has been in our years working together. I'd never heard half of this. So which I think is part of the point, right? That, you know, when you when someone says I'm an ambassador, they've said enough, right? I mean, and but I think we often don't get this texture. And I also think this is really quite indicative for a lot of our students, because you've had a career that I think is going to be similar to what, in terms of the movement and, you know, going to different places and having to gain new skills and building upon those and then applying those in different arenas, that we expect most people in this generation to have to experience, right? I think, which is very different than maybe our parents' generation, where they had a career and they set, you know, they did that thing. And I think so I guess for as you continue, I'm really interested in hearing, you know, as you're telling it now, there's this clear thread between all of it. You know, what was it like though at the time? And what were you learning in each of those places, and how did you then, you know, continue to integrate those things as you were continuing to develop your expertise and career and stature?
Well, it's interesting. So, you know, so I kind of came in as a journalist with a journalist mindset, being very analytical and kind of in a non-advocacy role.
Right.
And then at the Council on Foreign Relations, which is a nonpartisan organization, I also I worked on running these Blue Ribbon Commission task force reports, and actually one of which was co-directed by Lee Hamilton, one of our school's namesakes, and this was on U.S. policy towards the United Nations, which of course touches on peacekeeping and some of these other issues. And that was a really good experience, and I think also is, you know, very consistent with the ethos of HLS, which is to have strong opinions and to be clear in your analysis, but also to look for opportunities for common ground. Because that's really the path to the most sustainable change. It's when you can bring people around to your point of view, or you can find common ground with them as well. And that experience really duplicates a lot of what happens in government, because these task forces, I did everything from, you know, policy, you know, kind of immigration policy in North America, immigration and trade policy, to non-proliferation in Iran, to U.S. policy toward Russia, all sorts of things. But the people in the group were the senior most U.S. government officials who were outside of government at the time in most cases, but they came from different political points of view. So kind of, how do you work in an environment like that and actually say something and get consensus at the same time? Because you know, you don't want to spend all this time and come out with like pablum as your outcome. So that was a very important skill, but I think very consistent with kind of the ethos at HLS, which is, you know, and the two guys for whom the school is named. So, you know, I studied Russian in all 4 years in college, and that was a big advantage for me. So after being in the think tank world for 8 years or so, after serving in government, I then in a weak moment decided to work in presidential politics and was the national security director for Nick Cullether. I was the national security director for the Hillary Clinton for president campaign, her first unsuccessful presidential campaign. And that was a very different experience, because that really required you to be on a particular, take a particular point of view and advocate for it. But it was a, you know, it's a level of scrutiny of your work that, you know, was a huge growing experience, because everything you said, did, every glance you made, every conversation you took part in was available for scrutiny and was scrutinized. So it in that sense was really great training and experience. And then I was one of the few people who survived and was able to move from Hillary's campaign to Barack Obama's campaign. And I was a senior foreign policy advisor for President Obama, or candidate Obama. And then after he won, I was served on his presidential transition team, doing the State Department transition. And then I was in the Obama administration for 4 years. First, just as an advisor, and then as U.S. ambassador to Warsaw, and then which I can discuss more, but great experience. And when I was referring earlier to the idea that having the kind of broad liberal arts training that you have, plus an understanding and appreciation for the importance of area studies and the humility that that brings, those kinds of skills really come into play in a job like that, where your roles are really cross-cutting. So I spent a lot of time working on the issues of security there. I negotiated the first agreement to station U.S. Military forces in Poland, which of course, unfortunately, has become germane since February 24th and earlier in 2014 in the first invasion of Ukraine. But I also, you know, did a lot of work on democracy promotion. At that time, the democratic underpinnings of Poland were still very strong. They're now under threat, as they are in a lot of places, including in our own country. But there was cooperation with Poland to help promote, you know, democratic principles and institutions in the neighborhood. So in the Balkans, in Belarus, and other parts of Central and Eastern Europe.
So this is something that came up yesterday as well, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. That a lot of students who are thinking about careers in international careers, particularly government-oriented ones, like in the Foreign Service, for example, express concern around the increasing polarization of American society, and the sort of politicization of a lot of these things. Do you feel that that the Foreign Service particularly, but is shielded from sort of political processes as they're happening in the United States, or I guess maybe in a more broad way, you know, what role do you think sort of polarization that exists at our sort of everyday level is affecting or will affect people trying to get into foreign affairs work?
Well, one of the things I realized when we were making the decision about whether to come as a family to come back to DC, I realized, first of all, I had been out of DC for 12 of the last 14 years.
Right.
8 of them, of course, at HLS as founding dean, and then 3 in Warsaw. So it was, and one of the things I've discovered is that things are coarser. Now is the way I would describe it in Washington, which is, of course, a shame, but not surprising. And I guess what I would say is that you know, nothing is insulated from this, you know, this is in the category of things I'm supposed to say, but I think are really true. The kind of education you're getting, the kind of the combination of approaches that you're taking to understanding the world are one, very much in demand. People love IU graduates, HLS graduates in particular, because of this very unusual combination of language prowess, cultural understanding, and the humility it brings. and also just the skill set it brings, because you understand what it takes deeply to understand a culture, even if it's not the area that you initially focused on. And that's also combined with societal forces that transcend borders. And that's a very unique set of perspectives, knowledge, and skills, and something that people really, it's in short supply, and it's something people really look for. And to your point, Isak, it really helps to overcome some of the vituperation, polarization, because you approach things from an analytical perspective, a perspective of humility, and also having been and lived in places where you're different and where there's a lot of learning to do. Those are really great life skills and qualities and experiences, but they're also very much in tune with, what the world needs, and also how you can move your careers forward.
Yes. Well, I have one more question, and then I'm going to hand it over. So be ready to ask a question if you have them, everyone. But you've been a mentor to me, and I think have always made it clear that a lot of your energy is toward finding people who have the energy to carry on the baton, right? How important is mentoring in international careers? And, for somebody who's a freshman, sophomore, junior, where can they start?
Right. Yeah, it's a great question. I would phrase this as coachability in a way. I guess I'm turning it in the other direction, but in a way, what people look for in terms of colleagues or people that they want to hire and help them accomplish the goals and missions of a particular place or institution is people who are coachable, because there's so much learning to do. However expert you arrive at your field, there's so much learning. It can be substantive learning. It could also be learning of a different, work culture and how to fit in. And this is just, I would say, a superpower of HLS students. Coming from the Midwest, and also coming from this sort of background of being surrounded by people who have made a decision for their undergraduate or graduate studies to learn about the world. So this is really kind of essential. And then, in terms of, mentorship, networking kind of has a bad connotation. But I guess I would start with one another, not because that's just the right thing to say, but it's also true. As you kind of grow in your careers, increasingly the people who are going to be making decisions about you are going to be people your age. In some cases, as you get older, they'll be younger. So don't only think about it as, okay, who's the person I need to make an impression on, who's further along in his or her or their career, but, first think about your own kind of mutual support society, and that's just really important. And I wouldn't think about it in a transactional way. Really just think about it in a mutual support way. That's what ends up working really well. And then, there isn't anybody I know who doesn't want to talk to somebody who's launching their career. And so you should feel free to really reach out to those people. And I know Dean Cullither is very generous with his knowledge and networks, and I'm the same way. And I think you should really take advantage of everybody around you at HLS, including your faculty members who have great networks and stories to tell, and they operate in a lot of different spheres. This is also true for people in the different centers and things like that are a part of HLS. And then that, extends to the Emerging Leaders Council, which tend to be folks just sort of 1 or 2 steps ahead of you in their career trajectories. They are really great resources for you. And then as well are, the Dean's Advisory Council. These are folks who, the HLS team can help you be in touch with, or you can be in touch with directly, and they'll be really keen to give their guidance.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Okay, any questions, friends? I have plenty more if you guys don't, but
Kyle always has questions, so I'm waiting for Kyle to go off mute and
yes. I see a question here. Is there a time in your career that you believe was a turning point in the trajectory of your career?
That's interesting. Well, I guess so. I mean, there would be a number of those, but I guess when I first decided to move to Washington, I grew up in the New York City suburbs. I went to college in upstate New York, and I was living in New York and having fun. And I kind of always imagined that I would stay there. But then at some point, I had an internship in Washington, and I made that move, and that was a big move. And I knew at the time it was going to be a big move, and that had a big, that was one of those turning points. I remember my dad told the story about when he went. My dad was a World War II veteran, and he said, I got on the subway in Brooklyn. I went to the selective service station, and that was it. I was gone. And so I think that was a big decision to move to Washington, because I knew that was going to kind of start a trajectory. And then when I moved to Warsaw to be ambassador, that was a bit of it really shook things up, because rather than staying in DC and working at the White House, which was my most likely path, we had as a family had decided this was a good time to kind of try something different. And I remember Richard Holbrooke. How many of you know who Richard Holbrooke was? And his son, who did a documentary about him called The Diplomat. Yeah. And there's a picture of it in the Dean's Suite. Anyway, Holbrooke was a larger than life figure, always wanted to be Secretary of State, and was brilliant, but like all of us, a little flawed. But I remember when I was deciding what to do after the presidential transition, he said, all of you guys, all you want to do, that's how we'd say, all you guys, that's kind of how we would speak, is, be an assistant to somebody at the White House, but you should run something. And so that had an impact on me to kind of to lead an embassy, and that was a big and really positive experience. So that was a big turning point too, because I also knew that would really shake things up, and I wasn't sure what was going to happen at the end. And then actually that was the path that led me to be dean at HLS.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Kyle.
Hi, Mr. Feinstein. You got me. I've got a question for you. Sorry if my connection is a little spotty. I'm tuning in from Almaty, Kazakhstan. Having a good time over here.
That's awesome.
I'm currently in the stressful situation of applying to things for my time after HLS. And I know for a lot of students, that's definitely a very scary step of trying to land somewhere immediately after undergrad. And, I don't need to be reassured that it's not the end of the world wherever I end up for the first opportunity. It's definitely, I feel like I'm throwing a bunch of darts at a board to see what sticks, basically, whether it's grad schools, fellowships, work opportunities, other internships. It's a lot, especially I'll try to do it from the other side of the world. But I just wanted to ask for your advice for other students who might be on this step or will be on this step in a couple of years of finding that first opportunity. What should one look out for? Are there any tips you would have, or reassurance or advice you would give on that front during this important stage? Thank you.
100%. So first of all, I have to tell you that I met with President Tokayev of Kazakhstan recently, and the Kazakh ambassador, Ambassador Ashikbayev, also, because we have like a tech client that's in Kazakhstan, and let's just say it hasn't been going that well for them. So we're trying to help them out. But I've been very impressed with the what Kazakhstan has been doing and how important it's become geopolitically, and what an amazing experience for you to be there. But I mentioned it to you also, Kyle, because the ambassador really wants to meet the flagship students. So when you guys come back, we'll maybe you can help me with this, Kyle. We'll get like a delegation of the flagship students to come to Washington and hang out with them. And they'll give you chocolates and other things from Kazakhstan.
Yeah, absolutely. I know several of us are also Boren students, and I know that Boren will be sending us to Washington when we get back too. So maybe that can be a
Perfect. That's perfect.
crossover event.
And they're really proud of it, by the way. It's really interesting, you know, because obviously originally the flagship program was supposed to be in Russia, not in Kazakhstan. And so, so yeah, Kyle, it's really difficult, you know, it's in these situations. So one, you know, there are no easy solutions. I think what you were answering the question a little bit yourself, which is to try to buy time a little bit, you know, to try to extend the, you know, your decision point so that you have a little bit of time for things to come, you know, to fall into place. Like if you're a Boren, of course, you get some, you know, preferences for government jobs and things like that, but they take a really long time to develop. So to the extent that you can find things, you know, if, you know, that you want to do and figure out and build in some time for those things to develop, that's a plus. I mean, this is a more general answer, Kyle, than you want, but I'm a big proponent of the flag planting strategy. And in my career, when I've planted a flag, it's really helped. And when I haven't, it hasn't worked as well. And so what I would say is the flag planting strategy is plant a flag at a place that you, or in a function or a role that you think you want to do. And try to do it in a way that isn't like just there's only one thing or one position I want, but just kind of a general area, and then help that to drive your next steps. And then you could kind of then start this thing about evaluating it. It's like, okay, am I getting closer to the flag or not? And if I'm not getting closer to the flag, what can I do to what adjustments can I make? And the adjustments could be things that you know, different approaches to get to that goal, or you could decide, you know, really, maybe the flag is planted in the wrong place and maybe I need to move the flag. So that to me has been helpful. And I remember doing this and not even realizing I had done it when I had the first opportunity to work in the government, and I was unsure I even wanted to work in the government. I realized I listed the potential jobs I wanted, and one of them was to be a member of the policy planning staff. I found this in my paper somewhere. I'd totally forgotten about it. And like, it happened. So it's not like you say it and then it makes it so, but it does really help to have kind of a general directionality. And that will help shape some of your decision making or where you look for advice and how you approach it.
Thank you. Amangul.
Thanks so much.
Hi, thank you so much for your time. So I have this following question. So I'm taking this class with Professor Lindbergh right now on atrocities, and I just read your book on International Criminal Court. Yeah, so you have this like big research experience, and you've published a lot, and you've been really successful. Where did you start? Did you do it yourself? Like you just started doing it on your own? Did you have a mentor? And how did you progress? Were there any obstacles? If you could discuss a little bit that and kind of guide someone who wants to start their scholarly journey, that would be amazing. Thank you so much.
That's a great question. Amangold, I know all about Kyle, but I don't know about your background. So tell me what your major is and what year you are.
I am a junior, and my majors are a little all over the place. So I'm econ and math, international studies, and neuroscience. I justify that I'm just interested in behavior of people, um, in all aspects of it. I think I complement. I guess I take the best and well, the most interesting aspects of all disciplines, which is behavior. Yeah.
That's interesting. That's great. Well, so I was always interested in writing, and I always expected I would do some writing. And I'm trying to think of, I was editor of my high school newspaper and stuff like that. I think that the first piece I wrote, I think, was on this decision by it was then the Reagan administration to base a U.S. nuclear capable battleship in New York Harbor. So I wrote this long investigative piece as to why this was a bad idea. So I kind of started with op-eds, I guess. But now, there's just so many different, opportunities, different platforms that you can write for. I guess the key for me was always like when I was at the Center for Defense Information, I was like a researcher, and I had all of this information in front of me. And so I would follow what was happening on Capitol Hill. I would read the important hearings by different committees. And I kind of became a little bit I became a sponge. And so I found that very empowering. And so I would use that as a way to write about something that was fact-based and analytical, rather than just Lee Feinstein thinks. It was more about an analysis of something that was, in the news, but I would still have a kind of a point of view about it. And for me, the obstacle always to writing was, what's my point of view? By which I don't mean what was my opinion, but like literally, who am I in this piece for the reader? And so, so in the case of my first think tank type job, I was the guy who was on top of all of this information about what was going on. I was based in Washington, and I was going to tell folks what the sort of the debate was about issue X from this Washington research position I had. So you might want to think about that for yourself. Like if you're traveling, or if you're doing a, if you're like Kyle and you're in Kazakhstan, something that is, that you have a kind of a, doesn't have to be unique, but like a strong experience with, whether it's with certain materials or certain experiences, and, identify what your point of view is. I literally mean not pro, con, but like your point of view, like who you are as the writer. And that can help. Once you can figure that out, it's not always that easy. That can really help steer you towards doing things. And, another way, of course, is to work as a research assistant for people who are active in writing. By the way, Professor Lindbergh is a great writer, and he and I obviously have worked together over the years. And used to be a journal editor and an op-ed editor himself. So he's a super great resource and can give you some good ideas as well. But I would just, it's not so much, I know like this thing, write what you know. But I'm thinking more of kind of identify the subject matter where you feel like you have certain special insight, and, and then decide, okay, I'm the person who's overseas studying this, and I'm going to be talking to an American audience about it from that perspective, just as an example. Or you might be doing something, I'm writing for the interested public about subject X from my perspective as someone who's steeped in the material. Or, I mean, I'll just tell you a very simple op-ed I wrote. I think it was one of the last op-eds I wrote while I was dean, about my son, who was on the debate team at Bloomington South. And I was writing a piece about, you know, I wrote it for the Chicago Tribune, and it was basically, you know, about how it's your generation, because he's now a freshman at IU, but not at HLS, despite my best efforts. You know, how in this, to go back to Isak's point of view, this era of polarization and vituperization, people from different backgrounds from the state of Indiana pursue these issues when you're in an environment where you have to take both sides of the issue. And I also use this as an opportunity to talk about how people have stereotypes about the Midwest and they think it's one way or another. And my experience traveling up and down the state with my son was, you know, debate teams were remarkably diverse. The kids had a whole range of different points of view, and many of them were from, you know, the Midwest for long periods of time, and many of them were brand new to the Midwest, and many of them were from immigrant families. And this is just stuff that people don't really know, or they think they have ideas about. So I just think with the whole range of experiences you've had, there might be some real opportunities. Breaking in is really tricky. You know, it takes a big leap of faith. But Todd can help, and I'd be happy to give you some ideas too, if you have some things.
Thank you so much. That's very helpful. Also, I'm from Turkmenistan. I'm like really jealous of Kyle right now. You're in Central Asia, right?
Wow, amazing. That's great.
Anyone else with some questions? Go ahead, Hayun.
Hello. So I was just asking for advice because I'm at a situation where I don't really know what certain path or like field of study I want to take. I am studying like quite a variety similar to your uncle. So I was like, I'm a junior now and I should kind of know like what area I should focus on, especially since I want to go to graduate school, but like I haven't really been able to take part in like student organizations because I'm studying online mostly. So I guess everything kind of feels uncertain, and like people around me are doing so many things, like having lots of opportunities. And I guess, do you have any advice for like this kind of certainty of like not finding a path when other people are finding it? Kind of, yeah.
So tell me what your majors are.
International studies and media and geography as a minor in Italian. So I kind of, my, I guess, interest is sustainability, and like I want to find ways how we as a society kind of interact with nature, or like global warming kind of climate studies, but I haven't really found a specific area that I'm interested in yet.
Well, I mean, it's great that you don't know what you want to do yet. So you should really, you may be coming under pressure from different places, including and especially yourself, to have a clearer sense. But maybe you just pick a few things that you think you might want to do and just start experimenting. I don't know if you're in a situation where you can do anything in person, if you can, or remote internships, whatever. I would just look for some, maybe try out some internships, whether they're online or in person. You know, no fault, you know, just experiment. Because I think this is the time, and speaking of time, you have time, so you don't have to know right away. I mean, if you're under some need to go to graduate school sooner rather than later, I understand that may be a different circumstance for you. But if you have a little bit of time to experiment and try different things, even in the work world, that can really be beneficial. But this is kind of my chance. I really wanted to say this to the group. So I have to be careful because it's somebody who's everybody in this room could know, but it's not an HLS graduate. And he is a graduate of a small private elite undergraduate institution, and has been out for a year. and came to my office. He was in Washington. By the way, open invitation to come and visit me in my office. I just got a new office. It's not yet decorated, but it's pretty nice. And it's down the block from the White House, so we could take a walk. But he was, here he was, he had done exceedingly well in high school. He is at sort of one of the most hardest to get into four-year liberal arts colleges. And he was like, I don't know what I want to do, and I don't feel qualified to do it. And what I said to him was, I looked at his background, I talked to him, and I just said, here, my main message to you is you have everything you need to succeed in the next, in a position. And I just brainstormed with some ideas about things that met his needs, and he was interested in, I think, being a journalist. But I would say the same thing to all of you, particularly, given your backgrounds. And I mean, I feel like I speak with some experience in this space. I've hired a lot of people in different ways. And of course, I'm completely impartial about HLS graduates, but it's completely the case that all of you really do have what it takes to succeed in a range of different fields. And people, you may not always feel this, but I just want you to know that that is 100% the case. You've got the right approach, the right attitude, and a very unusual set of educational skills and background that really sets you apart. And so, don't feel holier than everybody else about it. But I know you don't. But I just do think you're all of you are very well positioned, even if it doesn't feel that way. Sometimes when there's nothing worse than looking for a job. I guess there are probably some people who like doing it, but I haven't met too many of those people, so it's very tough. But so again, my recommendation to you would be just to try to just experiment with a couple of things, maybe apply for a range of summer experiences if that's what works for you, and just see how it goes. It may not be what you want to do, but it might concretize some other things.
Well, I think also your timing is impeccable. That this is some of the most beautiful words. I was going to ask you for a closing statement, but I think to end with the statement of you all have everything really that you need to go on this trajectory. And I would like to respond back to you, Ambassador Feinstein, and say that is in large part due to you, and we are so thankful for your contributions and making the school what it is. And all of us are part of that legacy. So thank you again for taking the time to be with us. Everyone, please join me in thanking Ambassador Feinstein for his just graciousness in being here. So thank you again, sir.
And thank you, Isak, and back to you and to Dean Cullither and Heather Doomling, who I believe is there as well, and for everything you've done to build the school. And seriously, please be in touch. I can put in the chat. I'll put in the chat.
Please do.
Actually, I'm still an IU faculty member, so this is me at IU. So you can find me. So there I am. And so if you have any questions.
Did you put it? I didn't see it in the chat yet. Maybe you sent
Oh, I
it.
just sent it only to Kyle. Kyle, I'll do it for everybody. So, and I'm going to also send you my associate. By the way, my associate is sort of like my personal research associate, is a Badger and has a very similar area studies background. And her name is Lexi Schmidt, and I'm going to give you her information too. She's a German scholar. MA Global is for McClarty Associates, and you can copy her too, just to make sure that it gets through to me.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Feinstein. Very inspiring. Thank you for your time.
I'm the one inspired, and it's great to see everybody, and good luck.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Goodbye, everyone.